Today our lesson is on the history of the Gentile circumcision inside the church. And for the one of you who has asked, and for everyone who wonders, the difference between a lesson and a reflection is not just the length of the post. A lesson is either a lesson on the history of the Bible, a lesson on the scripture, or a lesson on a teaching on what is happening. A reflection may be a personal reflection. It is a reflection, a brief something having to do with the scripture, or for instance, the God in glory. That was both a reflection and a lesson. Reflections are generally less than 7 minutes. I try to keep them around 4 minutes, whereas a lesson will usually run about 7 to 9 minutes. So here we go. When first Paul and Barnabas went and preached the good news to the Gentiles, in case you're wondering why I'm always looking up, it's because I'm holding my script right over the corner of the lens. Someday I'll handwrite it, but right now I have a dislocated shoulder, and trying to handwrite, it's really painful. When first Paul and Barnabas went and preached the good news to the Gentiles, there was a generalized grumbling and discord among the disciples back in Jerusalem. Then Peter went over to the Gentiles and not only preached, but performed a miracle, bringing back to life that girl Tabitha, or Dorcas. And she had not been just recently dead. She was dead more than 3 days. The apostles and disciples in Jerusalem were upset. They were very upset with these actions, more so with Peter than Paul and Barnabas. But the whole kerfuffle came down to circumcision. The beginnings of this kerfuffle are shown in the readings on Acts 11, 1 through 8, and I've put that at the bottom. That was also the reading from 13 May, if you want to go back to that day or look up that scripture recording. To Jews, circumcision, which is completed on the 6th or 7th day after birth, in a ceremony called the bris. It's now done with a rabbi in an operating room, fully sterilely garbed, and intoning the prayers as a pediatrician prepares the infant. But the rabbi makes the actual cut, and then the surgeon completes and sews, etc. The bris is an act sealing the bond where God will watch over and protect the child. Some Jews who only sort of converted to Christianity, who only sort of followed Jesus, who secretly wanted this new church to fail, are called Judaizers. They believed and forcefully advocated that all Gentiles must become Jews and must circumcise. Now imagine you're an adult man. Are you going to want to circumcise? The Apostle Timothy, he was a convert to Judaism, and the Apostle Paul circumcised himself. That's in the Bible, and Paul tells of it, as does Timothy. That's why Timothy and Paul were so closely linked. But it was something that Timothy felt he needed to do, and Paul accommodated him. But that whole event so moved Paul that it changed his feeling about it for the Gentiles. The Judaizers also said that in addition to becoming circumcised, the Gentiles coming over had to follow all dietary strictures of the Orthodox Jews. They had to follow the dress codes, everything. They basically had to become an Orthodox Jew. The Gentiles weren't coming over for Judaism. They were coming for the good news of Jesus. Thus, the acts of the Judaizers were pushing the Gentiles out. But in an event, what it did is it split the young church right at about 220 AD, the 2nd century. So there was the Gentile church with the Greeks called the Hellenists, and the Romans, and the Ebionists, and about 4 others, thus the books of the Bibles. As Paul was traveling between the churches, the colonies, he would send them letters, and these are the books of the Bible. Paul and Peter tried repeatedly to bring the 2 churches together, and they worked to ensure that the practices were the same in the churches, and the interpretation of the Lord's word was identical. But repeatedly, circumcision kept coming up. Paul wrote in the middle of the 2nd century, "Circumcision is nothing, and uncircumcision is nothing. Keeping God's commands is what counts." And this is Corinthians 1:7-19. Please read about this and be aware of this is happening behind the scenes as you worship. There's more going on than weekly services. There weren't weekly services. And one guy writing sections of the book. There wasn't one guy writing sections of the book. The chapters of the Bible are truly letters that Paul wrote as he traveled. He's writing letters to them in response to their letters to him, or he hears as he's in Corinth what's happening in Rome, so he writes to Rome. He's in Rome and he's hearing what's happening in Corinth, and so on and so on and so on. And that's how the Bible happens. All of those letters were held in those colonies, and those letters became the book of the Bible called Romans, called Corinthians, called Galatians, called Colossians. So remember to know about this blessed book. But remember that some sections are entirely human written without any divine help. And those are some sections in the Old Testament, and you can feel the hate coming out of them. And now the very bottom part of the screen, you can see I've put that scripture that I noted right there for you. Okay? I'll see you tomorrow. Have a blessed night.